This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss, co-host of PBS's MotorWeek. He'll take your calls and comments now at 844-885-4677 or email him at radio@goss-garage.com. And now, Pat Goss.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Goss's Garage. I'm Pat Goss. If you would like to talk about anything that deals with a car or something with an engine in it, 844-885-4677. Love to talk to you. That's what the show is all about, is answering your questions and giving you good information. 844-885-4677. All right. Every fall, we talk about the importance of having the lights on your car work properly. See, as daylight gets shorter, it's more important that you can see and your car can be seen by other drivers. Now, checking a car's lights takes two people and some distance. Stand back about 50 feet while a helper operates the lights. The distance makes it possible to see differences in brightness that can't be seen up close. Of course, it's better to do your check after dark because darkness makes differences easier to see too. Now, you may have lights that don't work or lights that are dimmer than their companion. Now, if you have lights that don't work, the most likely cause is a bad bulb. So install a known good bulb and see if that corrects the problem. If it does, move on to life's next issue. But if the new bulb doesn't work, use a computer-safe test light or volt-ohm meter to check for power into the bulb socket. If you have power coming into the socket but none out to the bulb, your socket is bad. Never heard of a bad bulb socket? Well, believe me, they're very common. If there is no power into the socket, trace the wire back, checking for power every 6 inches until you find the place where the wire is electrically, not necessarily physically, but electrically broken. Now, a bulb that isn't bright as it should be can often be caused by a poor ground connection, so begin testing by inspecting ground wires for corrosion where they attach to the car's body. Now, here's one that nearly everyone gets wrong. It involves that nasty-looking grease often used on the base of bulbs. Although it looks sort of like dog poo, it's there for a reason, so don't wipe it away. Instead, renew it when installing new bulbs. The grease keeps moisture out, and it helps hold the bulb firmly against the electrical contacts in the base of the socket. Take the grease away and wind up with corroded sockets and a dead light. Another big issue is wrong bulbs, because you picked your replacement bulb by physical dimensions rather than both physical and electrical properties. Many bulbs are the same physically and look exactly alike, but are very different electrically. Just like household bulbs that are the same physically but produce differing amounts of light. Think 65 watts compared to 150 watts. They look nearly the same and they fit in each other's socket, but put the 65 watt bulb where the 150 watter belongs and you'll have a dim light. But put the 150 where the 65 belongs and you'll wind up with too much light, plus overheated parts or a fire due to the extra electricity needed to power the larger bulb. Same with your car. A wrong bulb can cause more electrical flow, which creates more heat, leading to burned wires, melted bulb sockets, and sometimes even melted plastic around the lamp. Many ways to be wrong, but only one way to be right. Buy your bulbs based on part number, not because they look alike. Remember, a large percentage of accidents occur at night because you can't see or other drivers can't see you. Don't become a crashed dummy. check your lights tonight. All right. Lights, big issue. You know, this time of the year, of course, we check the lights on every car that comes into the shop all the time. And it's amazing how many cars we find with lights that aren't working. Now, we talked a little bit about buying replacement bulbs based on physical appearance, and over here we have some bulbs set up. If you look at these two, you see that they are virtually identical. You know, they look the same, they've got the same contacts on the bottom and so on. Over here, the same thing. They have the same base, they have the same envelope that the light element is in. Now, you would think that those are the same bulbs, but in both cases, one bulb is electrically very different than its companion here. So in both cases, if you get those mixed up, yeah, you'll get a light, but on a modern car, you may get a check engine light as a result of it. You may also get a lamp monitor or lamp out warning. You may have all kinds of different issues going on because the electronics on a modern car look at the amount of electrical energy flowing through these bulbs to determine if the bulbs are good. And if there isn't the proper amount of electrical energy flowing through it, well, it triggers a lamp monitor warning telling you that you have a lamp out even though you don't. Another thing that happens is you may have a turn signal that flashes way too fast or way too slow. Turn signal flashers these days are electronic, and they also look at the resistance or the amount of current flow through the bulb. So you can wind up with turn signal functional problems and so on. And the interesting thing is that you take the car to the shop because you've got one of these problems, and the typical thing that happens is they turn on the lamp, or this turn signal, tail light, whatever it might be. They turn it on, look at it, and say, oh yeah, bulb's good, bulb's working. Now, what do they do next? Well, now they start checking circuits, presuming or assuming, and you know what assume means, assuming that the bulb is correct because the bulb is working. And go through all of these exotic tests and so on, and you can see your $100 bills just going up in smoke as the hours go on in the testing. And then at some point, somebody gets the brilliant idea, you know, maybe we ought to try a different bulb. Maybe we ought to look this thing up. Maybe we ought to make sure that everything here with the bulb is correct. And oh my goodness, this car has the wrong bulb in it. So they put the right bulb in it. And if the shop is legitimate, they'll tell you exactly what they did. If they aren't, and they don't want to lose a bunch of money that they put into testing, they will charge you for repairing wire connector XYZ for $300 and some odd, including testing. And all they really did was put in a proper bulb. So keep that in mind. Bulbs have part numbers on them. Bulbs are different. There is no such thing as just because it looks the same that it is going to be electrically the same. So keep that in mind. Folks, we are going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to be talking to John about a Mercedes-Benz coming up on Goss's Garage.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Never drive with a bad attitude. I know that's hard with so many stupid, distracted, aggressive, and just plain rude drivers on the road, but it really is the safe thing to do. I drive a lot, and I used to see reckless, rude, or aggressive drivers maybe once a month. But today, it seems like every other driver is doing something stupid. When it was sporadic, it wasn't so hard to deal with, but now it seems like there's always an idiot 3 feet from my rear bumper or weaving into my lane or cutting me off. Distracted? Probably. Dangerous? Absolutely. But there's nothing to do except drive defensively and not aggravate other drivers. Much as I'd like to, I don't middle finger the offending driver, and definitely don't hit my brakes to scare a tailgater. Initially, these situations may be simple mistakes, but an aggressive response to a mistake can escalate it into a personal confrontation, which can easily turn into road rage. Unfortunately, you have no idea which one of these idiots will try to hurt you with their car, a weapon, or their fists. Also, never make direct eye contact with the offending driver. If you're the offender, be courteous and get out of the way. Whether it's a mistake or intentional aggression, remember, back down, yield, let it go. It takes brains to overcome anger. Use your brain. Be smart. Life changes at a ferocious pace these days, especially when it comes to maintaining our cars. For example, automatic transmissions now need regular fluid flushes. Transmission fluid breaks down with use, and although it may look fine, its additives wear out and it can no longer properly protect bands, clutches, seals, and other hugely expensive parts inside your transmission. Bottom line, more wear and a shorter transmission life. Now you can significantly extend transmission life with a BG transmission flush every 24 to 30,000 miles or 2 years. BG makes the best transmission flush machine I've ever tested. It renews all of the fluid in your transmission, not just a small part of it. The BG transmission flush machine is safe, too, because it uses the natural circulation of the transmission. Your transmission will work better and last longer. As with everything BG offers, this is a superior service. For more information, go to bgprod.com or bgfindashop.com.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677.
For those of you enjoying Goss's Garage on tunein.com, please note our new show time every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern, and we do repeat the show at 1 o'clock, so you don't miss it if you're used to that time slot. The only thing is, at 1 you can't call in. All right, speaking of calling in, let's talk to John from Tennessee with the Mercedes E320. John, welcome to Goss's Garage.
Thanks, Pat. Good morning. How are you?
Okay.
Okay. Yes, I have a 2003 E320, which has 220,000 miles on it, and I have faithfully serviced it by the book and even more over the years, and I love the car. Recently, I had it in for service and asked the fellows to change the spark plugs at the recommended 100,000 mile interval. After some time, they came back out and said, John, we can't get 2 of your spark plugs out of there. As you know, there's 2 plugs per cylinder, so it's a total of 12. And he said his mechanic tried everything he possibly could, including a special brake-free fluid supplied by Mercedes. But he said, I can take them out of there for about $2,800, or that's minimum $3,000. And I said, well, I love the car, but it might only have a retail value of about $6,000, and I'm not sure it'd be worth it. Anyway, I was wondering what your thoughts might be. My first question is, would it be okay to leave them in there for another 20 or 30,000 miles till I sell it? Because I've got 10 new plugs, and it's running perfectly. You can't see the tack needle move at all. Or am I going to have some failure, in the short term here? So, or how could I get them out of there besides spending $3,000?
Okay. Number one, you probably can go longer. There's no way to guarantee that. They could fail this afternoon, too. But that's not likely. The probability is that you could go longer. I don't know what the other plugs looked like, but if they were in good shape and weren't overly eroded, the electrodes, burned away so bad that you couldn't, there would be no way to adjust them or anything like that, then chances are you've got another 20 to 50,000 miles. The other thing is,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Actually, when this happened, I asked him to show me the other plugs that he took out because that was my same thought. And there was no carbon buildup on the plugs, no cracks in the ceramic portion, and actually they weren't really worn at all. They were a little gray, but the gaps looked good. As I said, I change oil regularly, put good gasoline, and so the car's properly maintained. And so that's my first thing I asked. Let's see the other plugs, and they didn't look that bad.
Okay, well, then chances are you've got a long time to go. But let's suppose you don't. What about this $2,000 or $3,000? Are they nuts? I mean, goodness gracious. There are all kinds of ways to do this. But in many cases, the smart money is, rather than trying all these different things to get the plugs out, is just to force them out. Now, usually when you do that, it's going to pull the threads out of the cylinder head. No big deal. There are thread repair kits. There are helicoils where you can put new steel threads in the head. Average cost is about $120 per spark plug hole in most cases. And like here in the shop, we do some of the Fords, every day we get them. There's a dealership not too far away, and they're constantly breaking plugs off and so on. And every time they do, then they tell the customer, got to put a new head on it, or got to take the head off and send it to a machine shop or something like that. And we ultimately wind up with a car in a lot of cases. And on those, we charge half an hour, which is $50 per hole, to straighten them out. So it's relatively common practice.
Okay. Well, the dealer I go to, I don't want to name him, I trust him. They've been pretty good. But when he said, at minimum $2,800, I'm thinking, what do you do? Take the engine out of the car, take it apart, and put it back together? I mean, that's just a lot of time.
Yeah, it is, and all of this is done right in the car. Nothing other than access stuff removed. You don't pull the heads. You don't do any of this stuff. And although this is not common practice in dealers, because the manufacturers don't approve of this type of repair. In the aftermarket, independent shops like mine, it's a daily routine to do this sort of thing.
Okay, well that's great news, because as I said, I was hoping for another 20 to 30, maybe even more, 50,000 miles out of the car, because it's in such perfect shape and handles beautifully. I just put new tires on it, and I've had front end work done. It's been a little costly to maintain, but the car drives like a 2017. It's just wonderful.
Oh yeah,
I'd like to be able to fix it.
They were good cars, no question about that.
All right. Well, as I mentioned to your producer, I think, I talked to you many, many, many years ago about a 1993 E300, which was my favorite Mercedes of all time. And I had a knock in the front end, and no one could do anything about it. They couldn't find it, and I called you, and I can't recall what it was, but in about 3 minutes you told me, hey, check this out. And God darn it, I took it to the dealer, and he said, yep, that's the problem. So I really appreciate your help again.
Okay, good luck. Take care. Thank you. All right, and let's talk to Shepard from Ocala, Florida. 99 Ford Escort. Welcome to Goss's Garage.
Oh, good morning, Pat. And last week I talked to you, refresh the listeners' memories here. 99 Ford Escort, it just quit running, and I've checked it out. No compression in number 4 cylinder, and I after research I found out these engines are notorious for dropping valve seats. And you advised me just make sure that I clean out or replace the intake manifold. Well,
Right.
after ripping the head off of it, I found that the valve seat had lodged between the piston and the combustion chamber. The number 4 piston, the wrist pin land is completely shattered. And not only that, but pieces of the valve seat traveled through the intake system and boogered up the other combustion chambers. I even found a piece of valve seat embedded in the number 2 piston.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that'll happen. If you remember, I told you that there's 2 ways that this happens. Either the seat just drops down and it's still intact, or it gets shattered and then you got a mess.
Yes, sir. And it really bothers me because this car was very well cared for. When I took the head off, there was, almost no ridge on the cylinders. It was cared for every 4,000 miles with just conventional oil. It had a reman transmission put in it 35,000 miles ago. I did a complete lower brake system overhaul, and frankly, the car is just not worth saving at this point. It would $2,200 for a reman engine, and then it's kind of dumb to put an old starter on a new engine, so that's another $100, and the new radiator's another. So we're talking $3,000 for incidentals and accidentals to get this thing working properly. So I'm just going to look for another car for my son.
Yeah, that's
I
sad.
do, sir. Thank you so much. It is. And it really angers me because, like I said, I was an import mechanic for a long time, Asian imports. And I have a 99 Hyundai Accent that runs like a little sewing machine, and it's been well cared for. And the only thing I'm looking at now is possibly a new clutch for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the question I have is, not to slam on U.S. cars here, but can't the U.S. make a decent 4-cylinder engine? The old Chevy 2s were pretty good. I just don't understand what the problem is.
Well, we find lots of even Escorts with that engine that go 200,000-300,000 miles with no problems at all. The problem is that when you happen to be one of those people, even though it's a relatively small percentage, those cars were popular, so there's a lot of them on the road, and a small percentage equals a lot of engine problems. And
yes, sir.
You look at some other car that may have the same failure rate, but there's only a quarter as many of them on the road. So 10% of 200,000 is twice what 10% of 100,000 is. And
yes, sir.
So then you start seeing all of these complaints come up on the internet and so on, and it sounds like there's a huge percentage of them that fail, when in reality it may be a small percentage, but because of the vast number of the cars, you see a lot of complaints.
So what you're saying is, I work, I don't want to name the dealers, but I worked at several representative American car dealers, and then I went to work for a dealer that sold 3 brands of Japanese cars, and I can tell you that at the American dealerships, we had all kinds of work, and at the Japanese car dealerships, we were standing around like the Maytag repairman. Goodness me, the only time we ever saw a car that was really damaged is when it was in an accident or when it was customer abuse, customer neglect. The way we made our money back in the day is when we installed air conditioners and other accessories. So,
right.
Yeah. Other than that, these cars never came back until it was time for service.
Yeah, well, I understand that.
All right,
but
I thank you, Pat.
I remember that I'm an independent shop. I'm not a dealership. Very different thing. If it wasn't for Honda and Toyota, I'd be out of business. And
okay, well, that's another perspective. Good.
Right. So, they all make good ones. They all make bad ones. And lately, the domestics have become much, much better at building engines and transmissions.
Well, we're going to look for something about 14, 15 years old for him because we can't afford it. Well, he can't afford anything newer. So thank you for your time, Pat. God bless you.
Okay.
See you later.
Thank you. Take care. All right, let's see. Who do we have here? We have Brian from North Idaho. Welcome to Goss's Garage.
Yeah, good morning, Pat. Kind of ironic that the last gentleman was talking about that Ford Escort. I just have a little shop humor for you this morning.
Okay.
On last week's show, after I called in, you were talking about technical service bulletins, and it took me back to my younger years when I worked as a line mechanic for a Ford dealership. And for your listeners who may not know, a technical service bulletin is, I can't remember, they're either monthly or bi-monthly, that technicians get that they're a small magazine full of service procedures for new items that technicians may not know how to fix. And largely, also, they're full of mistakes that the car company made. Mine happened to be Ford I worked for. And it's funny, he talked about an Escort because that was the early 80s and the days of head gaskets on Escorts and, the Ford Tempo, and all the U.S. manufacturers at that time were kind of down on quality.
That's for sure.
And that was the big... Yeah, and that was the big advertising push on Ford where, I don't know if you remember this, Pat, Ford, quality is job one. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, and it made me smile every month or twice a month. As I said, I don't remember how often we got them. But printed right on the technical service bulletin, it was full of Ford's mess-ups, was that printing of that ad campaign. Ford, quality is job one, and the irony wasn't missed on me every time I got one.
Yeah, some of our stuff that comes through will have the original publication. I mean, even though we get our TSBs through a service, a lot of it's just reprints. And yeah, every once in a while we'll still see something for one of the older cars come through that has the cover and everything. Quality is job one, and then, we screwed up here because we did thus and such.
10 or 20 pages of screw-ups,
Right. Yeah, you got to love it. But I have to say that the domestics are getting a lot better these days.
Oh, I think so. Oh, absolutely, they are. Yeah, because there was what would you say? I think maybe a 10-year period where you just couldn't buy a quote unquote good car. I mean, everything was kind of down in quality. So.
Oh yeah. It was horrible for a while there.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to share that bit of humor. I didn't have time to call back in last week, so I was glad the guy with the Ford Escort called in just before me because it was an easy lead into that little bit of humor. So.
Okay. Really appreciate the input.
All right, thanks, Pat.
Thank you. All right, folks. Hey, 844-885-4677. If you have a question or a comment, if you want to share a little garage humor or something like that, that's perfectly fine. Anything that deals with automobiles, give me a call, 844-885-4677. We will be right back here in Goss's Garage.
Operators are standing by to take your call for Pat at 844-885-4677. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
I get lots of air filter questions, and one of the most common deals with why air filters need to be replaced so often. Well, actually, they usually don't, yet many drivers wind up buying a new air filter at every oil change, which is utterly ridiculous. Drivers say techs tell them if they don't buy a new air filter, they'll waste a lot of gas. Maybe that statement comes from ignorance or maybe dishonesty, but either way, you lose. Decades ago, dirty air filters did waste gas, but today, not so much. Cars now use a sensor to measure the air coming through the air filter, and computers to mix exactly the right amount of gas to match that air. So even though a dirty air filter reduces airflow into the engine, it doesn't affect gas mileage because the computer is always precisely matching fuel to the incoming air. In other words, a dirty filter means less air, and less air means less gas, so there's never an imbalance between air and fuel. Certainly when a filter gets really, really dirty, it can cause performance problems, but even then it may not affect gas mileage. So how long do air filters last? Unless you drive in really dusty conditions, air filters usually last 30 to 60,000 miles. Overselling of air filters is an enormous problem, and the best way not to be taken is to learn how to check your own air filter and check it twice a year. I get lots of questions about BG products, many about specific products or services like, is BG44K really that good, or are BG transmission, cooling system, and power steering flushes actually necessary? But most popular of all, do I use BG products in my cars? Well, the answer to all of those questions is yes. A regular schedule of BG flushes and chemicals will deliver the longest possible life from all the lubricated and fuel delivery parts on your vehicles. And do I use BG products? You bet I do. I drive nice cars, and I drive a lot. Plus, my live radio and TV shows mean that my cars have to be absolutely reliable. A no start from dirty fuel injectors or a failed transmission just isn't acceptable in my life. Remember, deposits and dirty fluids ruin expensive parts. For reliability like I demand, visit one of the quality shops that sell BG products and perform BG services. To find a BG professional near you, bgfindashop.com.
Now, back to Goss's Garage with your host, Pat Goss.
Folks, this portion of Goss's Garage is brought to you by BG Products. And just like I say in the commercial, yes, I do use them. Yes, I do sell them in both of my shops. Believe in them and have for many, many years. 844-885-4677 if you have a question or a comment. You know, the spot about air filters, well, interesting. I'm still, well, I shouldn't say still. We constantly get questions where people have been to some sort of shop, be it an independent, a quick lube, a dealer, whatever, and somebody has told them, oh, you need a new air filter. Going to mess up your gas mileage. I wonder how that works. You see, back in the day when cars had carburetors, you changed the amount of air that could flow through the car or through the air filter, and you caused a rich mixture, and that rich mixture meant that you burned more gas than you should, and your gas mileage went down, and so on. Well, carburetors haven't been around for many years now. All cars these days are fuel injected. Now, here's the rub with this business of shops telling, oh, you got to put a new air filter in it because it's going to ruin your gas mileage, or some other hogwash like that. All right, today the air comes through the air filter, then it goes through the mass airflow sensor or some other type of device sensor that measures the amount of air that is moving into the engine. All right, so if we restrict the airflow at the air filter, that means less air goes through the mass airflow sensor. Now, the mass airflow sensor recognizes this, sends a signal over to the computer. The computer then matches the amount of fuel to that reduced amount of air. So it always stays in balance. So even though you may have less airflow, you also get less fuel flow. So it doesn't affect your gas mileage. It all just sits there, and the computer keeps all of this in balance, and it takes all of this into consideration, and you don't have a reduction in fuel economy. Now, granted, you might, if there are other things that go along with the dirty air filter, and if the air filter is so bad that it is causing the engine to run bad, misfire, check engine light, stuff like that? Sure, it could. But most of these air filters that we see that people are being told that it's going to affect the gas mileage, typically they're not that bad. Car's still running fine. Somebody just took their car in for an oil change and, oh, you got to have a new air filter. Well, fact is that you ought to learn how to check the air filter yourself and then check it periodically. Because I got to tell you that air filters are probably one of the most oversold parts under the hood of a car these days. So, you know, computers and so on, they've taken over a lot of this, and all of the rules that governed how things worked and so on, those rules have changed dramatically over the years. So keep in mind, air filters typically, not always, but typically do not affect fuel economy. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right. Now, another thing, you know, it's getting that time of the year, and you know, if you live in a climate where temperature drops below freezing, you certainly have to be concerned about coolant and stuff like that. Want to keep the engine from freezing up, because if the coolant doesn't have the sufficient freeze protection, then, you know, it can freeze. When it freezes, the ice that forms has just enormous amounts of force, and it can literally freeze and just push pieces of cast iron or aluminum, just push it right out of the side of the engine or to the inside of the engine. Just cracks and chunks broken out of the metal and all kinds of things. So you want to make sure that you have the proper freeze protection. Now, proper freeze protection is a mixture of 50% new coolant, 50% distilled water. Now, we're going to try to use distilled water because a lot of tap water has tremendous amounts of minerals and stuff like that that can cause deposits to form inside the cooling system. All right, now, here's where the problem comes in. First, you don't want 100% coolant or antifreeze, whichever you want to call it. Modern term is coolant. Used to be, we called it antifreeze. Now, whatever you call it, you do not want 100%. Now, the reason is real simple. Number one, in order to activate some of the chemicals in the coolant, got to have water. So that's what helps give you the protection to keep the inside of your cooling system from corroding and parts failing and stuff. Water has to be mixed with the coolant. So if you put pure coolant in, you lose some of the protection. The other thing is 50% coolant, 50% distilled water gives you freeze protection of roughly minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, now one would think that if you put pure coolant into the cooling system, one would think that your freeze protection would go down to a lower, below zero number, maybe 50 or 60 below, but it doesn't. Most coolants will freeze at 11 degrees above zero instead of the 50-50 mix that freezes at 35 below zero. need the water to activate the coolant to give you the proper freeze protection and the proper protection against corrosion. So don't put pure coolant into your cooling system. All right, now we'll continue talking about coolant in just a moment because we're going to take a quick break. 844-885-4677. If you have a question or a comment, give me a call. Goss's Garage will be right back.
Stay tuned. Pat will take your calls next at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. Goss's Garage continues in a moment.
Space Saver spare tires sure do look silly, but if you use them properly, they will get you home safely. Now, a common problem with them is low air pressure. Spares are buried in the trunk and no one ever seems to check their pressure. Plus, they typically require much higher pressure than your regular tires. Also, Space Saver spares have limits on how far and how fast you can drive on them. Bottom line, always read and follow the caution warnings on their labels and sidewalls. Oh yeah, don't be one of those poor schmucks with a flat tire and a flat spare. Check your spare once a month. While checking the spare, look at the jack handle, and the lug wrench to be sure everything is there and in working order. The best spare tire in the world is useless without the tools to put it on the car. Some cars may even require special lug nuts to mount the spare. If those special lug nuts are missing, you will have no safe way to use your spare. Life changes at a ferocious pace these days, especially when it comes to maintaining our cars. For example, automatic transmissions now need regular fluid flushes. Transmission fluid breaks down with use, and although it may look fine, its additives wear out and it can no longer properly protect bands, clutches, seals, and other hugely expensive parts inside your transmission. Bottom line, more wear and a shorter transmission life. Now you can significantly extend transmission life with a BG transmission flush every 24 to 30,000 miles or 2 years. BG makes the best transmission flush machine I've ever tested. It renews all of the fluid in your transmission, not just a small part of it. The BG transmission flush machine is safe too because it uses the natural circulation of the transmission. Your transmission will work better and last longer. As with everything BG offers, this is a superior service. For more information, go to bgprod.com or bgfindashop.com.
This is Goss's Garage with Pat Goss. Call the show now at 844-885-4677. That's 844-885-GOSS. And now, Pat Goss.
Hey folks, please subscribe to Goss's Garage on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook, and for more car tips, tricks, and money-saving ideas, visit goss-garage.com. All right, 844-885-4677 is the number. We can talk about anything that deals with cars. Right now we're talking about coolant or antifreeze, whatever term you want to put on it. All right, now, you go to the parts store. You want to buy coolant for your car, and you see all these different coolants. One of them says it will fit every car on the planet. I wonder how that works. I truly do. Reason being is that a lot of coolants these days, or virtually all of them actually, are proprietary. They have their own chemical mix that matches the various types of metals and plastics and sealants and so on used in the cooling system on that make and model of car. So that brings up the question, suppose we have a car that doesn't want any silicates or phosphates. Well, we might be okay with that coolant in that car, but suppose we have a car that wants silicates and phosphates. Then this universal one may not have them, and then we're not going to get the proper protection in the cooling system. The other thing is that there are different types of water pumps on cars. Some spin at very high speed, they're high-speed pumps. Others spin at low speed. And the difference is that the size of the pump and how much coolant it can move per revolution and so on. And some of these things, the pumps are really teeny tiny. So what they do is they drive them off of the timing chain or the timing belt, and they overdrive them. So if your engine is running at 1,000 RPM, the water pump might be running at 2,000 RPM. And that's so that they can get enough coolant flow to keep the engine cool. All right, well, those high-speed water pumps that some cars use, you have to be careful what chemical composition there is for the coolant that you put into them, because if you have things like silicates and phosphates that are, they're hard materials that are dissolved in the coolant, what happens is that the speed of the water pump, because it's turning so fast, it acts like a centrifuge, and it spins these chemicals out of solution and causes them to build up around seals and so on inside the cavity where the water pump is working. So that means that in some cases you put the wrong coolant into one of these cars with a high-speed water pump, and it doesn't take very long, 6 months or so, and the water pump fails because the seals are bad. And the seals are bad because these chemicals were spun out of solution. They build up on the water pump shaft that eats up the seal, and coolant starts leaking out of the water pump, and you need a new water pump. So I question a lot of these things when there's a bunch of cars that have proprietary formulas for transmission fluid or power steering fluid or coolant. How does the product in the container know? How does it know that this car does or doesn't need silicates and phosphates? How does it know that it doesn't need some other chemical? So I think what the real issue here is that it isn't the product that's in the container that is the miracle. I think the container is the miracle, because what must happen is that when you pick up that container of fluid, be it coolant or transmission, whatever it might be, that container has some way, I guess it has one of these micro cameras or something built into the container, and it looks around. It looks to see what kind of a car it's going in. It has a small database built into a teeny little computer that is right into the skin of the container. It looks at that, and then it analyzes what's supposed to go into this car. Now, here's where the miracle comes in, because once it has determined the year, make, model, and what type of coolant or transmission fluid or whatever goes in, it changes the chemical formula of the product inside the container to match the car. Now, I think that is miraculous. I truly do. So the big thing is that you have to be aware that there are different coolants, there are different transmission fluids, and so on. And yes, universal works sometimes, doesn't work all the time. So you have to be a little careful. All right, let's go back to North Idaho, talk to Brian again. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Pat. I hope you don't mind talking to me again, but you reminded me of another question I had for you.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember from a couple past calls, but I'm building a couple 69 Ford Fairlanes with small blocks in them.
Right.
And when you talked about fuel injection, I'm considering going to an aftermarket TBI system just for drivability purposes on either the daily driver I'm building or the quote-unquote show car. It's not going to be a show car, but it's a full ground-up on that one. And my question is because I used to be a technician, but I have almost no experience with fuel injection because carburetors were still a thing when I was a technician. Anything I should look out for in these aftermarket systems? Any special precautions I should take? Because I know there is a small ECU involved in these where, the old carburetors were just a lot of orifices. But Just off the top of your head, can you think of anything other than just making sure I go by the manufacturer's instructions? And second part of that question is, have they been around long enough? Do you know about them? Are there some companies that are better than others at this? I know I'm looking at Phytech just simply to keep costs down because, as you know, these bills can go out of control if you don't watch that kind of thing. So that's my question about that fuel injection.
Okay. Are there differences? Yeah, there are huge differences. The number of sensors, what they're looking at, all determines how well the injectors meter the fuel and match it to air and stuff like that. So you'll find some that have almost no sensing capabilities for the ECU. So they primarily look at throttle setting and a couple of things like that. And they really aren't that much different than a carburetor. Others will give you oxygen sensors in the exhaust. They will look at coolant temperature. They'll look at inlet air temperature and bunches of things like this. And they'll have a much more complex algorithm in the ECU and stuff like that. They'll give you a lot better performance. They'll be a lot more reliable and so on. So I would certainly do a comparison on what each one of these offers. Edelbrock and Holley and so on that have been doing this for a long time, a lot of their products, even though they may cost more money, may give you, it may cost 20% more, but give you 100% more features and benefits.
Yeah, one consideration in the ground up is, of course, I want to keep the engine compartment looking as factory as possible.
Right.
So less sensors, less wires, the better. In that case, as long as it's a reliable system.
Right.
Now I know the Phytech that I'm looking at. The ECU is built right into the throttle body itself, so that's nice. Once the air cleaner's on, you don't see anything. Couple of wires you got to hook up. Now that comes with one wideband O2 sensor for obvious reasons. And I don't know if this is a question about fuel injection or not because I don't know much about them, but it only comes with one. Would there be an advantage if it's possible with that unit to putting an O2 sensor in both collectors, or does that matter?
Well, it probably wouldn't matter in that case because that's a rudimentary system. And,
right.
It's really not taking a lot of readings. It's probably doesn't have the capability of metering banks and so on. See, some of these can change individual injectors and so on, although most of these are, like you're talking about, are throttle body injection. And they only have two injectors. But some of the others can look at firing orders and all kinds of different things and change the pulse width and everything of the injectors to match what it's seeing in the exhaust. What you're talking about here,
I know.
I don't think that would would hold true, and probably not even possible.
Units, even in the Phytech, if you have electronic ignition, for example, you can it'll adjust your timing and all that stuff. Of course, I guess it's like everything else. You get what you pay for. So just kind of do my research and spend what I want to spend. But
these systems, if you're building a car that isn't going to be a daily driver, do you really need all of this stuff? Well, you probably don't. You want it to start. You want to be able to drive it to a show and have it start when you want it to, and drive it home without all the sophistication for performance and everything like that. And that makes perfect sense.
Yep, precisely. Okay, Pat, thank you.
All right,
have a good
take
weekend.
care. Ah, yes. Aftermarket fuel injection. Big business these days. And getting better all the time to the point where you can take an old carbureted car and you can put fuel injection on it. You can do a number of different things. You can use throttle body, which looks like a carburetor but has two injectors mounted in the venturis. You can do multi-point fuel injection for some cars. All of these things have advantages, but you have to weigh the advantages to the cost and to what you expect and need out of the car. Like we were just talking about, a show car doesn't have the same needs as your daily driver. Your daily driver, you want it to perform flawlessly throughout the RPM range, throughout the temperature range, and so on. And for that, you might want to step up to one of the better systems. But a show car, start it, drive it to the show, shut it off, sits there, start it, drive it home, or put it on the trailer, whatever. You don't need and wouldn't get any benefit out of all of these things. Plus, you wouldn't have the authentic look once a lot of sensors and so on. So you have to weigh what you're getting, what you actually need. Do you need all of it? Maybe, maybe not. If you do need all of these features, look to one of the high-end units. You're going to pay for it. There's no question about that. But, it mimics what you would have if you went out and bought a brand new car, and, the type of injection that they have and so on. Very sophisticated these days. So just keep that in mind. Shop, do comparisons, figure out what you need, buy what you need. All right, folks. Hey, we have done it one more time. Everything. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Steve McMillan for producing today's show. For everyone here at Goss's Garage, I'm Pat Goss. Until next time, got a big favor to ask you folks next week, so please drive gently. We'll see ya.